Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's webinar, Teaching Treaties with the Treaty Education Initiative by Connie Wyatt Anderson. My name is Jessica Knapp, and I am the Online Engagement Coordinator for Canada's History Society. The Treaties and the Treaty Relationship webinar series is a collaboration between Canada's History Society and the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. Joining me as co-host for today's webinar, on behalf of the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba, is Cynthia Bird. Many of you will recall Cynthia discussed in the last webinar the history of treaty making and the significance of the Royal Proclamation of 1763. For those of you who do not know, Cynthia is a Cree educator from the Peguis First Nation in Manitoba and Treaty 1 territory. She has 34 years of work experience in community education, research involving urban Aboriginal homelessness, Indigenous curriculum development, and group facilitation processes. Thank you for joining me, Cynthia.
Thank you, Jessica. Tansi, Anin, okay, everyone. Thank you all for joining us from across the country, from Vancouver Island to Cape Breton and the different treaty territories. The Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba is a neutral body. It was created through a partnership between the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and Canada with a mandate to strengthen, rebuild, and enhance the treaty relationship and mutual respect between First Nations and Manitoba as envisioned by the treaty partners. This is accomplished by undertaking work in 3 areas through research, facilitation, and public education. So the treaty webinar you're seeing today falls under the public education mandate. For more information on the Commission, please go to the website at trcm.ca.
Canada's History Society is dedicated to promoting greater popular interest in Canadian history, principally through our publishing, education, and recognition programs. To learn more about Canada's history, I encourage you to go to canadashistory.ca. Both Canada's History Society and the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba are on social media. If you are interested in extending today's conversation on Facebook or Twitter, feel free to mention us using the handles that are listed there or the hashtag #TreatyHistory.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Connie Wyatt Anderson. Connie has been a colleague of mine since 2009-10 when she joined the Treaty Relations Commission and the Treaty Education Initiative as a co-writer of the materials that were developed from kindergarten to grade 12. Connie comes to us as a long-time educator with over 25 years of experience teaching high school history and geography. She's been involved in the creation of many student learning materials and curricula at the provincial, national, and international level, and has also contributed to a number of textbooks, student support guides, and school publications. She co-authored the grade 11 history text that's used in Manitoba schools and is currently writing a grade 9 geography textbook for Ontario. She also received she is a governor, of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and she's chair of its wing, the Canadian Geographic Education. More recently, Connie received the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal, presented by the Royal Canadian Geographical Society in 2012, and she was a finalist in 2013 for the Governor General's History Award of Excellence in Teaching. And in 2014, she was honored by the Aboriginal Circle of Educators for her work with the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. Connie currently resides in the PAW, Manitoba, with her husband and her 2 young daughters. So welcome, Connie.
I see we have folks from across the country, and what a pleasure it is to be here. I see we have folks from Winnipeg and Cape Breton and friends from outside of Ottawa. We have some folks from Sustainable Development Manitoba, Regina, the Museum Association of Saskatchewan. I see we have a friend here from Creighton, and you're relatively close to me here in the PAW, Manitoba. We have some friends from the Peel District School Board, so it's an absolute pleasure here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope across the country everybody's enjoying the beautiful weather. So what we're going to do today, friends, is this is the second part of our Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba and Canada's History Society webinar series. This is the second session. Cynthia spent some time a short while ago talking about the history of treaties. What I'm going to do today is a more concerted focus. We're going to look at the Treaty Education Initiative and what we've done here in the province of Manitoba in the realm of treaty education. Okay, so what we're going to do today, friends, we are going to take a look at the Treaty Education Initiative. We're going to set some context with the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. We're going to look at how the initiative is meant to support teachers by incorporating treaty essential learnings into their classrooms. And we're also going to step out on a national scale and see how the Treaty Education Initiative fits with national movements to indigenize curricula. I'm going to start off first with providing some context. So who are the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba? The Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba is a neutral body. It's created through a partnership between the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, the Government of Canada, and the goal of the Commission is to strengthen, rebuild, and enhance the treaty relationship. The TRCM itself has a three-pronged mandate. Part of the mandate is public education, part of the mandate is research, and part of the mandate is facilitation. And today, in my role, and you heard Cynthia speak a little while ago, our role has been in the realm of public education. So my goal today is to speak to that part of the mandate. So the Treaty Education Initiative, which I probably going forward will call the TEI, it is a public education strategy. It is a strategy meant for all Manitoba students from kindergarten to grade 12. It has been supported. It is the education mandate of the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. It's supported by the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, also by Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, and we've also had wonderful support here in Manitoba from the Manitoba Education, from the Department of Ed, from the Ministry, and the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Centre. So these have been our partners, our formal partners in the Treaty Education Initiative. The goal of the Treaty Education Initiative is to bring treaty education to all Manitoba students, and we talked about that. The overarching learning outcome, and I mean a bulk majority of us here are teachers and we speak in learning outcomes, is that all Manitoba students will demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the topics, concepts, and understandings of treaties and the treaty relationship by the end of grade 12. And I cut in here, you can see a couple of photos. The left-hand photo is from September 2014, then Minister of Education here in Manitoba, then Treaty Commissioner James Wilson. And we were launching the K-12 kit. And I'm going to talk more about the kit. These are the learning resources we have for our educators. If you look to the right, this is the initial launch of the Treaty Education Initiative /kit. And this was done at a very sacred site here in the province of Manitoba at the confluence of the Assiniboine and Red Rivers, the Forks in Winnipeg. And there was a ceremony there you can see from 2011 to 2014. So the overarching goals, I told you the large overarching goal, the goals of the Treaty Education Initiative are, number one, to increase the knowledge and understanding of treaties and the treaty relationship among all students, to ensure students understand the impact of treaties and the treaty relationship on the creation of our province in Manitoba. And because we have a national audience, I think it's integral that we also understand the impact of the numbered treaties here in the West on the creation of Canada. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward in this presentation. And also, too, our last goal is to build bridges between all peoples in Manitoba and in Canada to strengthen our society and our prosperity moving forward. You can see in this slide, I cut and paste a document that we had in the Winnipeg Free Press. It was a multi-page insert about treaties and the treaty relationship. And what I really like about this insert is that is the title, and you can see it from where you're sitting, I suspect. It says Our Past and Our Future. And I often say when I'm teaching teachers or students or colleagues about treaties, that treaties are as much about the future as they are about the past. And I see Les's question, and I'm going to answer it if that's okay. And Les writes to us all, and Les, I believe you are in Creighton. Is the role of the TRCM similar to the Office of the Treaty Commissioner in Saskatchewan? And I'm going to say, yes, it is. As a matter of fact, Cynthia and I had the good fortune of working alongside with the Office of the Treaty Commissioner as we were working on these learning resources. So it is similar. They predate us here in Manitoba by about a decade. Thank you for your question. And we can move to the next slide. So because this presentation is focusing on the Treaty Education Initiative and what we can offer educators, I thought we would look at 4 broad areas. One is the Treaty Education Resource Guides. One is the kit itself. You heard me talk about the kit. You're welcome, Les. One is professional development training. And the 4th one you can see on your far right is the website. We have a portal, an open access portal for teachers across the country, informal teachers, pre-service teachers, to access treaty education materials to support them in their journey. So the first thing I want to take a look at, I told you there are 4 things I'd like to cover in our time together today, is the Teacher's Resource Guide. Robin, I can see your note about the treaty relationship, and I'm glad you brought that up. Cynthia, my good friend and co-writer in the initiative, and I can see Cynthia typing. The last presentation spoke quite a bit about it, and I'm going to continue, and I will definitely come back to your question. I appreciate that. Thank you. So the Teacher's Resource Guides, and we're talking about 4 ways that we support treaty education in the classroom. For every grade level, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, you get the point, until grade 12, we offer a teacher's resource guide. And it is, as the name implies, it is a set of lesson plans with links to Manitoba curricula. Doesn't mean that it can't be integrated into other curricula, into other provinces, or even into other grade levels. But the intent is to help teachers integrate treaty education into what they're doing already. Our goal when we began the Treaty Education Initiative was to avoid the beads and feathers approach to education when it comes to Indigenous education, and to avoid an add-on. You know, and I'm a longtime teacher, something that you do on June 15th at the end of the year. We wanted to guide our teachers to integrate treaty education into their curricula. The logical entry point was the social studies, given the topic in social studies, geography, history, civics. So what we offer Manitoba teachers, K to grade 12, is a resource guide. The lesson plans are linked to Manitoba curricula. Some of these treaties, and I just looked to my left here, Mary Jane, that's a fantastic question. Do these treaties include, there's a bit on pre-contact, but much of the treaties, because this is a Manitoba initiative, look at the numbered treaties. But it doesn't mean that students do not look at other treaties between Indigenous nations before contact, treaties that predate the numbered treaties. And also some of the students, depending on the guide, will look at treaties like the Treaty of Waitangi in New Zealand. Do not look at each of these resource guides are fortified by lesson plans, Blackline Masters, and there's also a teacher handbook, if you can see on the right there. A teacher handbook is a little Cole's notes for you as an educator with some historical content. You can switch the slide, Jessica, my friend. These activities are designed for teachers. These activities are designed for teachers. So each lesson plan is laid out as a traditional lesson plan, in that there is a page or 2 background to the concept. So if I'm talking about the treaty relationship or the Treaty 1, then as you flip the pages, each lesson is designed the same. It's a typical lesson plan with an overview, stated learning outcomes, but because this is a Manitoba initiative, there are clear links to Manitoba curricula. Then the lesson plan goes through a typical lesson plan, you know, the 4A format. What can I do to activate my students' prior knowledge? How are my students going to acquire new knowledge? How are my students going to apply? And then there's assessment. Many of the lesson plans are fortified with a Blackline Master, a BLM, and this is something that as an educator you can print, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the term. So they are designed for teachers. Next slide. At the same time, coming again as a longtime educator and being a history educator my entire career, teaching history is not always the sexiest topic. I used to joke that the gym teacher was considerably more popular than cool than me. I really think we have an opportunity to engage kids in multisensory ways, in multiple ways with engaging with the past. So when we're looking at treaties, we're not having kids here in Manitoba just memorize the text of Treaty 1 or the date of Treaty 3. What we have them look at, we look at relationships. What relationships were forged between traders and Indigenous people before there were treaties? What relationships were forged between Indigenous nations and Indigenous nations? So we look at relationships. We look at traditional teaching, specifically oral history. So the Treaty Education Initiative is not a singular linear movement where students approach just treaties. They're looking at relationships. They're looking at traditional teachings. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you love history, Shirley. We look at the history too. I mean, obviously there's a historical focus, but then there's also a historiographical focus. How do we know what we know? I always find that an important thing. My entire career was teaching Indigenous kids just on the other side of the river here in the Paw in the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. And obviously one of the entry points, one of the treaty sub-themes is treaties. So to recap, the teacher's guides are meant for teachers, but they're also meant for teachers to engage their students in a hands-on, thoughtful, multidisciplinary way. And we can flip ahead, Jessica. So how do we know what we know? Yeah, that's a historiography. That's the basis of history, I think, Shirley. When I was teaching history, I taught grade 11 for years. We always had asked my students, how do we know what we know? Who told this story? What evidence that we have? We want to make our students into critical thinkers, right? I'd like to spend some time. I told you I wanted to talk about four things today in regards to the Treaty Education Initiative. The first one was the learning resources. The next one is the Treaty Education Kit, and that's what we'll talk about next. So imagine in your head now, and you saw a photo of the Treaty Education resource guides. So they're bound guides. They help you. There's 8 lessons. Now they are part of a kit. So think of a box. Okay? Think of a relatively large box. And in that box are a wealth of materials for you as an educator to engage your students in the treaties and the treaty relationship. So what do you find in that box? You find the guides. But you also find supplemental reference books and materials. Now, depending on what grade you teach, or perhaps you run a club or you work in a museum, these are meant for what you need them for, right? I taught grade 12, so I might hand my grade 12s the Wabung 40th anniversary edition. I wouldn't hand it out in a grade 3 class, but I might read it as a teacher. You will also find things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You'll find a very handy document called Treaty Essential Learnings. And I think I've heard Cynthia more than once call it the Cole's Notes of Treaty Learnings. And this is largely adapted from our friends of the Office of the Treaty Commissioner in Saskatchewan. Oh, thank you, Rick. Treaties in Manitoba, you'll find a book. You'll find a book on treaties in Canada. And you'll find a newest publication by the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba, a series of elders' teachings from the different Indigenous cultures here in Manitoba. So these are to support the Treaty Education Initiative. And I see Cynthia typing. You can go to the next page, Jessica. There are also texts made specifically for students. There are texts specifically made for students. You'll find a very new set. They come out quite recently. There's a set of treaty readers, and it's about the treaty relationship. And you can see them on the top. They're 3 booklets, and they're meant for younger learners. One thing I've learned, though, teaching grade 11 for years, that just because something is pegged as a grade 4 resource doesn't mean you can't use it in grade 12. It depends how you assess it, right, teacher friends? You'll also find something else in the kit itself, and it's in the bottom left. It's Kinnikinnick, and it is a play, a treaty play that was written for the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. And it is a play symbolizing the treaty relationship. It's between three characters, a fantastic piece of drama. Absolutely. It's aimed at younger learners. It is supported by a set of lesson plans, and I've actually done the play in my grade 11 class with much success, it has also been filmed professionally, and you will find that filming in the kit. Another thing you'll find as supplementary student text to fortify what you're doing in the classroom, and you can see there is the Treaty ABCs. It's a vocabulary activity for younger level students, and the Dakota Aote. It's a book based on the Dakota experience here in the prairies, which is a parallel but different experience to Treaty First Nations. So these all make up the kit, and you can flip to the next page. Another thing you'll also find, so again, you have to imagine this in your head. You have a box. This is the treaty kit. You find a historical Indian treaties map, and that, as a teacher, a high school teacher, is a wonderful. It is an infographic timeline that shows the relationship between Indigenous peoples pre-contact until the present time. And there is a list of events, historical events, and there is a list of legislation on the timeline. I know it's difficult to see, but the red on the timeline represents Indigenous nations. The blue represents whether it be the French, the British, the Canadian government. And the way they are related to each other, whether they're touching, whether there is a gap, speaks to that relationship. And it is a wonderful teaching tool. There are year-at-a-glance charts, which are curriculum charts that you can put up on your wall to show your students what you're doing. There's a plethora of maps, and different things. So you also get visuals in the kit. Next slide. These are some of my most favorite things in the kit, I have to say, and I told you that I come from a high school background. There are manipulatives in the kit. Two of the manipulatives you can see at the top is a treaty medal, and the treaty medal, there's no scale there, but it's the size of a good sized plate, and it is a replica of the treaty medal. And this is a wonderful teaching tool because the medal is laden with symbolism about the relationship. You see two individuals standing equally, shaking hands, and there are lessons that speak specifically to that manipulative. I use that treaty medal in my classroom to teach everything from treaties to World War I. I mean, specifically World War I, when there's a large Indigenous participation in the war. The beaver, you can see, is one of the puppets that comes with the play, and the beaver kind of hung out in my classroom all the time. My students liked him. So those are some of the manipulatives. So we can move on. Another thing you find in the kit, and this is relatively new, many of our resources have been translated into French. We understand that there is a large French immersion community here in Manitoba and other parts of the country, a French community. So many of our materials have been translated into French. The Kinnikinnick play, you can see a map on the right, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And what we've done, we have gone through the teacher's guides and we have translated all the Blackline Masters en français. Next slide. Other things you find, so again, I'm still talking about the kit. So far, we've talked about the teacher's resource guides and the kit itself, the box of materials. The majority of the print materials are also available in the kit on a USB. And as a teacher, I like that. One of the reasons I like that is because I can share it with my colleagues. I also like the fact if there are Blackline Masters, I can manipulate them then. I can change them to meet the needs of my student. I mean, I look at a canned lesson plan, I've said this for years, as a recipe. The teacher's the cook. He or she takes it and makes it better. Oh, I use French things and English things all the time, Shirley. Wonderful to hear. That was one of the things Cynthia and I and the team, Amanda and everybody else at the TRCM heard forever when we were doing professional development was Français resources, Français resources. We can move ahead, my friend. Some of our newer treaty education resources, the Treaty Education Initiative is not stayed, it's fluid. We're moving on, we're adapting and growing with our partnerships. One of our newest partnerships came with Canadian Geographic Education. And if you look on the left, that is a treaty map. It is a map of Manitoba, and you can print it in your classroom. You can print it in your classroom. It's made up of, if I look quickly, 16 8.5 by 11 sheets. So you can print it in your classroom, you could affix it to a table. It'd be mighty big to put on a wall, but you could. And there are learning activities to engage kids in place-based learning with a geographical lens about the treaty landscape here in this province. If you look in the middle, I mentioned the treaty ABCs. And if you look to the right, I also mentioned the Dakota book. So these are some of the newer resources that we at the Treaty Relations Commission have put out rather recently. We're going to talk next about training. I told you that my goal today was to enter into 4 areas, right? I wanted to look at the resource guides. I wanted to look at the training. Professional development has also been a circle. It has been a recursive thing since we began the Treaty Education Initiative. We have engaged with educational professionals all across the province of Manitoba. We have led 2-day workshops in treaty education with classroom teachers, catalyst teachers. These are people that go back to their divisions and it's a train the trainer model. We have worked with school administrators. We have worked with pilot teachers. We can go to the next one. Yeah, thank you for your comment again, Shirley. Our training sessions are typically 2-day, and we've tailored them. Sometimes they're tailored to K to 6, 6 to 12, K to 12. Our sessions follow somewhat of a format, but we adapt for our place and the needs of our people who we're training. One of the major goals of our training sessions is to offer a balanced perspective to the treaty relationship in history. So we have elders come in. We have noted historians come in, knowledge keepers. Our pilot teachers, the first teachers that took these materials on the ground in Manitoba, were integral to this. We have had the treaty commissioner. We try to offer a balanced perspective on treaties. Because we are dealing museum staff, yes, and I see the question mark. Thank you, Sherry. We have actually done presentations to the Manitoba Museum. The Manitoba Museum this past March asked us to come and do a presentation, and we did a full-day PD session to their staff. We've also worked with the staff of the Winnipeg Art Gallery. So thank you for that. That's a wonderful question and a wonderful point. We have not included them, and that is a definite voice. That's a definite voice. Because we deal primarily with educators, but we tailor it, we do lots of hands-on activities for classroom implementation. So part of our training sessions, we will take some of the lesson plans that we've been talking about and we'll enact them in class. We make sure there's clear linkages to curricula. And I think one of the best things about our training sessions is that it only enables educators to do a great job of what they're doing already. It also allows teachers to liaise with each other, and it only strengthens the Treaty Education Initiative. We're going to take a look at, and I told you we were going to enter in a few areas here. Beginning last year, we started to build the Treaty Education Initiative with a suite of web resources. And when we're done chatting here today, I highly suggest you take a look online. So if you go, and Jessica's going to go to the next, if you go to www.trcm.ca, it's a very easy web page to navigate, and you click on the TEI tab. And when you open the TEI tab, you will get access to something called the Teachers Portal. And on the whole left-hand side, and you can see it there, there's videos. There's a reference corner. You can see the Teachers Portal. And on the side, you get all kinds of different things. You get some did you knows, you get some maps. These are things that you can print in your classroom. You can get activities for students. There are PowerPoints that you can upload. If you want to engage your students with the history of treaties, there are PowerPoints you can use in your classroom. There are puzzles and games. I'll let you go to the next slide, Jessica. So, and this is only a brief overview. If you look on the bottom left, that's a Treaties in Canada. That's a slide shot of one of the PowerPoints that's available. Right above it is a simple word find. There are maps you can print. You can see the treaty medal. That is a coloring page. And again, do with that what you will. If I was teaching grade 2, I might color and engage in it. If I was teaching grade 12, I might look at the symbolism in that medal. If you look to the far right, it says, what does treaty mean to me? That's a game. That's a PowerPoint game. If you look to the top right, there's a document that says treaties in the news. And what you do, you engage students with contemporary treaty issues. You have them look at what is the news seeing, about treaties in the news today. In the middle, there are just some tips about using guest speakers in the classroom. If you bring an elder in, if you bring a historian in. So there are a wealth of information that is open and free to the public on the Treaty Education website. So if we do a step back now, let's take a look then. What is the Treaty Education Initiative? We talked about that it is an education to bring, it is a movement to bring treaty education to Manitoba schools, K-12. It is aligned with and supports the Manitoba curriculum. As I mentioned earlier, there's absolute opportunities to integrate it across other curricular jurisdictions. It provides students with a range of materials at various grade levels and presents different points of view. I'll get back again to how do we know what we know? You know, do we use the written word? Do we use artifacts? Do we use primary sources? It is intended, like all curricula, to develop students' skills, knowledge, values, attitudes. It is meant to enhance students' motivation. And we have heard wonderful stories from our pilot teachers about one teacher who began the first day of class by engaging in a treaty with her students. And the treaty was the classroom rules. And the kids negotiated, and they kept to that treaty all year. We've heard from other teachers who have started treaty clubs in their classrooms. We've heard absolutely wonderful stories. We ensure that tasks and activities cater for learner diversity, to multiple intelligences, to different learning styles. We provide opportunities for discussion and further inquiries to facilitate students' critical thinking. I mean, in the world of history education, the greatest movement to hit curriculum development in about the last decade has been the historical thinking concepts beginning out of the University of British Columbia. And most ministries of education have taken these and woven them into their curricula. And the key is critical thinking. And we really want our kids to do this. It provides teachers with activities for independent learning, reflection, assessment, and it supports teacher growth, learning, and professional development as well. If I step back from the Treaty Education Initiative, and the Treaty Education Initiative is a Manitoba initiative, but it doesn't mean that it is hemmed in by the borders of this province. The TEI is really part of a larger national movement to indigenize curricula. And this has been going on for quite a few years here across our country. And it has been exacerbated, especially by the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action. There are concerted points in the TRC calls to action, to education, and there are points that specifically mention treaties and the treaty relationship. And I think that the Treaty Education Initiative fits within this national movement. So it is not a solely Manitoba movement. As you know, treaties are not defined by the borders of this province. Sherry asked a really good question. Would the education kit be available? Absolutely. To use in a museum or park, I would certainly think so. There are lessons that could be adapted. If you're bringing in a school group or just families. I mean, I think of some of the manipulative, Sherry, things like the treaty metal itself. So if we take a look, and thank you for your questions, if again, we step back now from Manitoba and look at us nationally, this isn't a singular movement, this is a national movement. We have the BC Treaty Commission that was established in '92. One of my friends here today already asked about the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. We have materials coming out of Treaty 8. You can see the TRCM. The Union of Ontario Indians actually came to visit us not so long ago in Winnipeg at the Treaty Commission and made their own teacher's kit. Our Micmac friends at the province of Nova Scotia. So this is a national movement. This is a national movement that, to me, has power. Coming from an education standpoint, a good friend of mine a few years ago said to me, our students and our kids taught us how to recycle. Our kids taught us how to wear our seatbelts. And our kids can teach us a good way forward. I have faith in our kids and our schools. And if we move ahead, we started off our presentation, Cynthia and Jessica introduced everybody, and I was really captured by this image. And I see the background, you see some sketching and you see some text. This is taken from the Selkirk Treaty of 1817 here in Manitoba. Treaty 1 was signed in 1871. So this is the Selkirk Treaty. Lord Selkirk came here to Manitoba 1812 and settled the Selkirk settlers and worked with the people of Peguis. And to me, it is the essence of the relationship. We're working, we're sharing, we're growing together. And I really found that image, I found it empowering. And if you flip to the next page, Jessica, I told you I use the treaty metal. I find the treaty metal laden with symbolism. And it's a wonderful tool, whether you're teaching in a museum, whether you're teaching grade 2, whether you're teaching grade 12. The image is powerful, powerful, powerful. You can see the treaty metal itself. Treaty metal would be about the size of the palm of your hand, a bit bigger. You see a stylized version of a First Nations man and a European man at the time. You see a hatchet buried in the foreground. You see the symbols of creation all around. If you flip it over, you actually see the Queen. This is an enduring relationship. This is a relationship of equality and of fairness and looking forward. Again, I find it powerful. I told you when we began that I live in Nepal, Manitoba. I've taught in Nepal, Manitoba for my entire career. And my teaching career has been on the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, which is adjacent to the Paw. And the Paw has an interesting history. Henry Kelsey came through the Paw in 1690. He was the first bayman in, went to Cumberland House, and went as far south as the Touchwood Hills in Saskatchewan. Fur traders like the La Vérendrys were here. The first wheat in Western Canada was planted in the Carrot Valley, so there is a long relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in this area in which I live. And there's been some rocky times. Often the Paw is known for the Helen Betty Osborne case. And when I moved to teach here in the Paw in 1992, I was only buoyed by the relationship I saw between the students, between the kids on the Opaskwayak Cree Nation and the kids in the Paw. And I'll get you to flip to the next page. 3 years ago, the students from Oscar Laughlin Collegiate, which is a band-controlled school on the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, and the schools from Margaret Barber Collegiate Institute in the Paw, the provincially run non-Indigenous school, there's Indigenous students in it, of course, actually closed the bridge on the Saskatchewan River. The Saskatchewan River is a literal and figurative divide between the two communities, and they signed a friendship treaty. They signed a friendship treaty to work together. And I am ever buoyed by this relationship because I think as educators, as museum officials or whomever, if we bring these teachings to our kids, we are bringing them to ourselves because they are going to build and fortify our future. You can move ahead, Jessica. So just again, to set some contact, there's a bit about the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. I talked about the the TEI resource guides. I talked about the Teachers Portal. I talked about the teacher's kit, and I talked about our professional development. And I think with that, friends, if there's any questions, I will open the floor up.
Thank you, Connie, for that excellent presentation. And I would like to also encourage participants to put forward your questions for Connie.
Okay, I can see, and this is Connie here. Thank you very much. May I go ahead and just read some? It says, we're wondering when the next set of training may be coming, cost and dates. Thank you, Sherry. Very helpful. I appreciate that. Multi-faith communities, wonderful things. I know my good friend and education manager from the Treaty Commission is here with us today, Amanda. And Amanda, maybe you can discuss upcoming training. Meg, I see a question, and you're from the Unitarians. Have we had any groups for multi-faith communities? And I think not yet. Amanda may speak otherwise, but thank you for your question.
As Amanda types her response into those questions, Connie, oh, there she goes. The next session is next week, but is now closed. School administrators and Catalyst teachers. Teacher training is scheduled for December 6 and 7, 2016. And thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Well, people are writing out their questions. I will ask you a few questions, Connie. So you've discussed how to teach and treaties in the classroom and the materials that can be used and how to support teachers in those ways. But I wonder if you can tell us again why it is so important for Canadians and for these students to know the history of treaties in Canada.
I think, and I can only speak from my perspective, and thank you for your question, Jessica. I think because treaties are part of the fabric of the creation of this nation. I mean, very soon, next summer, we're going to be celebrating our 150th birthday here in Canada of Confederation. And to me, treaties are part of the story. They're not an add-on. They're not an inset box. They are part of the story. When you look at Confederation, starting with 4 British colonies in the eastern part of our country and spreading west, the Indigenous story and the relationship between governments and Indigenous peoples moving forward, it is an integral part. And I think we're at a very interesting time in teaching about our past, where Indigenous issues are not an add-on. They're not a period of coloring in the afternoon. They are part of the story. And I think it's a two-pronged approach. I think it's really neat now to be a teacher because we are giving history a more fulsome view. And we're asking our kids, whether they're in grade 4, my youngest daughter's in grade 6, is to look at how do you know what we know, whose voice maybe wasn't there. So we are at a really neat time in Canadian history.
That's so great that they're starting that question as early as grade 4. Who is not there? Whose voice do we not hear? That's an integral part to studying history and to gaining as much knowledge as towards what we would consider a truth, a truthful history, which is about gaining all the perspectives. So thanks, Connie, for sharing that. In your view, what are the strengths of the Treaty Education Initiative for both teachers and students? And I welcome Cynthia and Connie if you would like to share the response to this, because I'm sure you both have maybe differing opinions.
I can speak if you don't mind, Cynthia. I think, and I'll just speak again from my own personal perspective, having been so lucky to be on this journey, I think the relationship building, I think of the stories that we've heard from classrooms across this province, from grade 1 to grade 12 to elders. I think when you feel like you're part of something that is going to change something, it is the most fruitful work, and it's the beginning of something. And probably one of the most gratifying things I've seen as one of the co-writers of this project is people taking it and making it their own. Whether it's a teacher in Flin Flon, Manitoba, or whether it is, an educator in Winnipeg, but taking it and making their own and empowering students. It's the success stories and the voice that it has given all students in this province.
Yes, for me too, the opportunity that treaty education has provided to teachers and students has been wonderful. It's an opportunity to learn about our shared history, but it's also an opportunity for teachers and students in regions across Manitoba to localize that treaty relationship piece and the treaty history in their region to make it more meaningful for their students. So we're always excited when teachers come to the training sessions, and by the second day they begin to see how they can connect the resources to their students' learning in the communities and schools that they come from. So it's exciting. I'm excited for the educators and the people learning about treaty education and how they're able to share that.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Cynthia. One last question from me today, as everybody in the group is still welcome to share their questions. Are you able to see the links? Well, sorry, I'll preface this question with you. Earlier in your presentation, you showed us an image of one of the example resources that are accessible through the Treaty Relation Commission of Manitoba's website in regards to the Treaty Education Initiative, and it was a worksheet to learn about contemporary treaty issues. So can you explain to me more fully what the links you see are between the historical numbered treaties and the contemporary treaty issues?
That assignment, and thank you for your question, Jessica, that page is meant to engage high school learners, I would say grade 10 to 12, with how the media covers Indigenous issues. So it is meant to have kids take a look at our media and what is the media covering. So let's say I was looking at an event that was taking place in Peguis, Manitoba right now. Let's say I found an article in the Winnipeg Free Press or the Brandon Sun or whatever, and I would have the kids draw parallels to what they have learned about treaty education. That this is an ongoing dialogue. And in a critical sense, sometimes, especially in grade 12, we look at how the media covers Indigenous issues.
Very good. Thank you, Connie. Any final thoughts from Connie or Cynthia?
Oh, sorry. I thought you said for, not from. This is Connie. I just want to thank all the attendees. It's an absolute pleasure watching everybody sign in from across the country. It's been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica and Connie, for a wonderful afternoon, and to the participants who gave your time to be part of this training opportunity. Jimmy Gwitch.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Cynthia. Very quickly, I will summarize Amanda's responses to the questions about when and where the TEI professional development sessions are available. At this time, they are available in Manitoba. You can go to the website to see the full schedule, and majority of the sessions are presented in English with bilingual instructors there. So both English and French educators can learn from those opportunities. For further questions, Amanda has shared her email address with us earlier, and it is on the screen at this time as well, and I'm sure she would like to see some emails from you with those questions that you still have, so feel free to do that. At this time, I'm also going to share a link in the chat room that is to a feedback survey. Feedback about today's webinar, the process, the topic, more topics you would like to see from us. Please do tell us what you think. We always love to read those. So once again, thank you, Connie, for your presentation on the Treaty Education Initiative. Thank you, Cynthia, for joining me as co-host today. And thank you to everyone who viewed and participated in this second webinar of the Treaties and Treaty Relationship webinar series. I also want to thank the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba for their efforts in organizing this webinar series.